Arthur Sterling had not been on a date in 14 months. Not because there was no one interested. There were plenty of people interested, more than he could count, more than he wanted to think about. The problem was what they were interested in, which had very little to do with Arthur the person and everything to do with Arthur the name on the building, the face on the financial magazine covers, the number in the accounts. He had been engaged 3 times. The first time he was 28 and her name was Vanessa, and they had been together for a year, and he had genuinely believed, with the full, uncalculating belief of someone who had not yet been hurt in a specific enough way, that she was in love with him. Then a business crisis hit, a quarter where the company's stock dropped significantly, where there were real questions about the direction of the group, where the numbers went in the wrong direction for 6 uncomfortable months. And Vanessa, warm, attentive, always on his side Vanessa, had gone quiet and then distant. And then one evening she had sat across from him in a restaurant and explained, with a care that was worse than coldness, that she needed someone more stable right now. The stock recovered in the following quarter. Vanessa called the month after that. He did not take the call. The second engagement had lasted 2 years and had ended when he found, through a combination of an overheard conversation and a private investigator his lawyer insisted on before the prenuptial agreement was finalized, that his fiancée had been maintaining a separate relationship with a man whose attraction was that he had no money at all, which Arthur spent some time understanding before arriving at the conclusion that he had been a financial strategy rather than a romantic choice. The third had been the worst because he had been the most careful. He had waited. He had watched. He had told himself that this time he had chosen more wisely. When it ended quietly, without drama, with a clarity about what had always been the actual basis of the relationship, he had not been devastated. He had been tired. Tired in a way that is different from sadness. The tiredness of someone who has repeatedly tried the same door and found it locked, and who is beginning to understand that the problem is not the door but the key. He had everything. He genuinely, objectively had everything. The empire he had built from the age of 23 was, at 35, a multi-billion-dollar group operating across technology, real estate, and healthcare. He had apartments in 4 countries. He had the cars. He had the access and the invitations and the table at the restaurant and the seats at the event. And he had the specific, private knowledge that none of it was the thing he actually wanted. What he wanted was simple, embarrassingly simple, in the way that the things we most want are always slightly embarrassing when we name them plainly. He wanted someone to look at him the way his mother had looked at his father when they were sitting in the small house in Ibadan before any of this existed, not at what he was holding, at him. He had a plan, a specific, slightly insane, entirely sincere plan. He was going to disappear. Not literally. He was not going to close the company or abandon the accounts or stop being Arthur Sterling in the legal and professional sense. He was going to step sideways out of being Arthur Sterling in every way that people could see and experience him. He was going to become art. Just art. A struggling painter with bad shoes and a cold apartment and no safety net visible to anyone who encountered him. He was going to live like this for 6 months, and he was going to find out, not through a process or a background check or the careful observation of someone who knows the ending. He was going to find out in the way that truth is actually found, which is by making yourself available to it and letting it arrive. What he found was not what he planned for. That is always how it works. This story has a love in it that is real and complicated, and that had a moment, one specific moment, where it nearly did not survive the weight of what Arthur had chosen to do. And what happened in that moment is the part that changed him more than the 6 months of painting on street corners ever did. Stay right here. Like this right now if you believe that real love has nothing to do with what someone owns. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub, new story every week. Hit the bell. Drop a comment, Has anyone ever hidden something from you to test you? Was it worth it? Arthur Chukwuemeka Sterling was born in 1988 in Ibadan, Nigeria, the second of 3 children of Emmanuel and Grace Sterling. Emmanuel Sterling was a secondary school mathematics teacher. He had been teaching for 21 years by the time Arthur was born, 21 years of the same classroom in the same school in the same neighborhood, with the same combination of patience and firmness that had made him one of the most respected teachers the school had ever had. He was not a man who talked about money. He was a man who talked about what money was for, which was different. He had a modest salary. He managed it with the precision of someone who understood that precision was the only tool available to him, and he managed it well enough that his 3 children ate properly and went to good schools and never felt, or so he believed, the specific anxiety of genuine scarcity. He was partially right about this. Arthur felt it. Not hunger, they were not that close to the edge. Arthur felt it in the smaller ways, the specific awareness of what things cost that some children have and others do not. The way he noted prices on menus in the rare restaurants they visited on special occasions. The way the school fees arrived each term with a quality of tension in the house that resolved only after Emmanuel had spent an afternoon at his desk with his ledger. His mother, Grace, was a seamstress. She worked from home, a sewing machine in the room off the kitchen that was her professional space, and from which came the sound that was the ambient texture of Arthur's early childhood. The machine in the morning, the machine in the afternoon, Grace's voice calling through the house with the specific maternal efficiency of a woman who was simultaneously a mother and a business operator, and who managed both functions without allowing either to be diminished by the other. She was the one who first saw that Arthur was different. Not in the way parents say children are different, the comfortable general observation that each child is unique, in a specific way. She saw it when he was 7, and she caught him sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pencil, drawing the house from the inside, not clumsily, not the way 7-year-olds drew houses, but with the specific attention of someone who was looking carefully at what was in front of them and trying to put it accurately on paper. She watched him from the doorway without him, knowing she was there. He erased something. He looked at the corner of the room again. He redrew it. He was correcting his own work. She told Emmanuel that evening. Emmanuel said, he wants things to be right. Grace said, he wants them to be real. They were both correct. He got into university on academic merit, not the top university by name, but the one with the engineering program he had researched and decided was technically the most rigorous, which was the kind of decision a 17-year-old made when he understood what he was actually trying to accomplish. He studied computer science and engineering. He graduated in 2010. He did not take a job. Emmanuel had been expecting this conversation from about the 2nd year of university. He knew his son. He knew the way Arthur looked at problems, the specific quality of attention that the school notebooks had been full of, that had produced consistently extraordinary results, that had made his teachers describe him in reports with words that accumulated into a picture of someone for whom the standard track was going to feel eventually insufficient. He had a conversation with Emmanuel that was short. "I have an idea," Arthur said. "Tell me," Emmanuel said. He told him. The idea was about software infrastructure for small and medium businesses in Nigeria. Specifically, the gap between the software solutions that existed for large corporations and the complete absence of accessible, affordable, genuinely useful technology for the businesses that were actually the backbone of the Nigerian economy. He had been thinking about it for 2 years. He had been researching it for 1. Emmanuel listened. He asked 3 questions. He said, "How long until you know if it works?" Arthur said, 2 years. Emmanuel looked at him. "I have some savings," Emmanuel said. "Not much, but I believe in the idea." Arthur looked at his father. "I am not asking for money, Papa," he said. "I know," Emmanuel said. "I am offering it." He did not take it. He found other ways. He found 3 early investors through a connection he made at a university alumni event. Not wealthy investors, people who were early-stage risk-takers with limited capital but real commercial judgment. He rented a tiny office in a shared workspace in Lagos. He worked on the product for 18 months with 2 friends from his engineering cohort. The product launched in 2012. The first 6 months were the specific combination of intense and unrewarding that early-stage products experience when they are right about the problem and wrong about some element of the solution. The technology was good. The implementation, the way it arrived in the hands of the small business owners who were supposed to use it, was difficult. He changed it. He went to the businesses themselves. He spent 3 months visiting small business owners in Lagos, Ibadan, and Enugu. He sat with them. He watched what they actually did with their day. He understood what they needed in a way that he had not understood from the office. He rebuilt the product. The rebuilt version launched in 2013. In 3 months, it had 500 clients. In 6 months, it had 3,000. The growth after that was the kind that attracts attention before you are ready for it to attract attention. Series A funding came in 2014. Series B in 2015. By 2016, the company, Sterling Tech Solutions, was the dominant small business technology platform in Nigeria and had begun its West African expansion. Emmanuel died in 2016. He died of a stroke in September, 4 months after he had visited Lagos for the first time to see the Sterling Tech Solutions headquarters. A proper office building in Victoria Island, with Arthur's name on the board outside and young engineers at their desks, and the specific busy quality of a company that is in the middle of building something significant. Emmanuel had walked through the building with Arthur. He had been quiet most of the time, quieter than usual, which Arthur had noticed without being able to read fully. At the end of the tour, at the car that was taking him back to his hotel, Emmanuel had turned. He had looked at Arthur for a long moment. He had said, "You got it right." Not the business, not the building. The 3 questions he had asked in the Ibadan sitting room in 2010 were about whether Arthur understood the problem, whether the timeline was realistic, and whether the commitment was genuine. He had been evaluating the same 3 things for 6 years. He said, "You got it right." He died in September. Arthur drove to Ibadan the morning he heard. He sat in the house he had grown up in. He sat in Emmanuel's chair in the sitting room, the specific chair that Emmanuel had occupied every evening of Arthur's childhood, and he stayed there for a long time. Grace sat beside him. They did not talk very much. She made tea. At some point in the afternoon, she said, "He was very proud." "I know," Arthur said. "He was proud before the company," she said. "I know," he said. "He would have been proud if there had been no company," she said. "I want you to understand that." He understood it. He carried it. The company continued growing after Emmanuel died, because companies do not pause for grief. Arthur worked through the following year with the specific, focused energy of someone who is directing their emotional energy into their professional life, because the professional life is where they have the most control over outcomes. The company expanded into Ghana, Kenya, and Côte d'Ivoire. The group structure was reorganized. New divisions were added: real estate technology, healthcare management systems. By 2023, Arthur Sterling was 35 years old, and the Sterling Group was valued at figures that made financial journalists use words they reserved for the top tier of the African business conversation. He also had the 3 failed engagements. He also had the whole. He had not told anyone about the plan before he executed it. Not his lawyer, who would have had very specific concerns. Not his sister Adiora, who was his closest family and who would have asked sensible questions that he was not ready to answer. Not his friend Tund, who had been his university roommate and who was the closest thing he had to someone who knew him entirely. He told no one. He arranged the logistics quietly. The apartment, a basement flat in a working-class area of Lagos that he leased through a shell arrangement that would not be traced to him. The cover story for the office, a private health period, a retreat, the kind of temporary disappearance that was uncommon but not impossible for someone in his position. The management team could run the company for 6 months without his daily presence. They had been capable of this for 2 years. He trusted them. He packed one bag. He took paint supplies. He had painted since he was 12, not seriously, not with formal training, but consistently, the way some people played chess or ran, as the thing they did when they needed to be somewhere other than in their head. He was genuinely good. Not professionally good, personally good. The kind of good that comes from 30 years of doing something because you love doing it rather than because you are being evaluated. He left the watch on the desk. He left the phone, the main one, the one with the Sterling Group contacts. He had a separate device, basic, a number nobody important knew. He put on jeans and a paint-stained shirt he had specifically sourced for this purpose. He walked out of the Sterling Group headquarters in Victoria Island, and he did not look back. He became Art. The plan starts now, but Art is about to discover that plans are one thing and what actually happens is another. The first month was harder than he expected. Not the material difficulty, he had prepared for that, anticipated it, was even slightly drawn to it in the way of someone who has lived in comfort so long that its absence seems, from a distance, clarifying. The material difficulty was real but manageable. The apartment was cold and the food was simple and the bed was thin, and none of this was surprising. What was harder was invisibility. Arthur Sterling was never invisible. He had not been invisible in years. From the moment the company had become what it became, he had been the person in a room who changed the room. Not because he performed, he was not someone who performed. It was that the knowledge of who he was arrived before he did, and that knowledge rearranged the space. Art was invisible. Completely, consistently, unremarkably invisible. He set up his painting materials on a corner of a street in a busy commercial area of Lagos, not a market, but the kind of street where people moved with purpose between shops and offices and restaurants, and where nobody stopped unless they had a reason to. Nobody stopped. The first day he sold nothing. The second day he sold nothing. He had not thought carefully about whether he had expected to sell anything. He realized, sitting on his stool on the second afternoon watching people move past his canvases without slowing, that he had perhaps assumed his work would be seen and found good without the context of who he was. He had assumed that the work was enough. The work was not the problem, the context was. Nobody stopped to look at paintings on a street corner in a busy area of Lagos, not because the paintings were not good, but because stopping to look was a choice that the people on that street did not have the time or the attention for. They were going somewhere. The paintings were not part of where they were going. He adjusted. He moved locations. He tried the area near a park, a public space where people moved more slowly, where the ambient mood was different. He tried the area near a cafe strip where people lingered over coffee on weekend mornings. He tried a weekend market. At the weekend market in his third week, he sold 2 paintings. Small ones, the kind that fit easily in a bag, that could be bought on impulse without requiring a decision about where to put them. He priced them at amounts that felt genuine for a struggling street artist. 2,000 naira each, the rough equivalent of modest money, the price that said these are real but accessible. The buyers were a couple who had been walking through the market slowly, the woman stopping to look at most things, and the man following at the patient pace of someone who had learned that this was how the Saturday market worked. The woman stopped at his display. She looked at a painting of a Lagos street in afternoon light, nothing dramatic, just the specific quality of the light at that time, and the way it made the ordinary street look briefly extraordinary. She said, "This one has something." She could not say what it had. She did not have the vocabulary for it. But she was right that it had something, and the something was the specific attention Arthur had paid, the same attention he had paid since he was 7 years old at the kitchen table, correcting his own drawing until it was right. He sold it for 2,000 naira. He felt the 2,000 naira in a way he had not felt money since the very first payment he had received for the very first piece of software he had ever sold, before the company was a company and the money was still a real signal rather than a unit. He walked home with the 2,000 naira. He bought rice and tomatoes and made a simple dinner and ate it in the cold apartment and thought, "This is real." The woman Clara came to one of the weekend market appearances in the 5th week. He had known Clara from his previous life. She was a Lagos socialite, the kind of person who appeared at the events that Arthur had attended for professional reasons, and who had a specific talent for being decorative without being particularly interesting. She had been pursuing Arthur Sterling professionally for 3 years, which is to say she had been interested in Arthur Sterling's access and status for 3 years, and had managed this interest with the consistent warmth of someone whose warmth was a professional tool. She did not recognize him. He had not thought clearly about how this would feel. She walked past his display with the specific unseeing quality that he had come to recognize as the standard response to his work on that market. The organized not looking of someone who had decided that street art was not a category worth engaging. He heard her say something to the friend she was with, something that included the words smell and failure and cheap, without arranging them into a full sentence that he caught cleanly. He did not feel anger. He was not certain what he felt. It was something that required more time to identify than he had in the moment. He looked at his canvas. He thought, "I know who you are, and you do not know who I am, and you cannot see the painting." He thought, "This is information." He wrote it down in the small notebook he had started keeping in his jacket pocket. He had started the notebook because he understood that the 6 months were an experiment and experiments required data, and the data was not just who stopped and who did not, but what the encounters actually told him about the specific mechanisms of how people saw each other. What Clara had shown him was that her way of seeing was not changed by whether the subject had money or not. It was a way of seeing that was organized around status signals, and that filtered out anything that did not generate the right signals regardless of what was actually there. This was useful information, but not new information. He needed something new. He met Maya on a Thursday morning in the 7th week. It was cold. The specific cold of a Harmattan morning that surprised you if you had not been paying attention to the fact that Harmattan had arrived. He was on his stool with his canvases and his supplies and a cup of tea that had been warm 15 minutes ago and was now the temperature of an honest conversation about regret. She was walking in the direction of whatever she was walking toward, carrying a bag of groceries. The reusable bag of someone who had decided some time ago that the environment mattered and whose decision had become simply part of how she moved through the world. She stopped. She did not stop the way the couple at the market had stopped, the slow consideration, the assessing pause. She stopped the way people stop when something they did not expect to see has appeared and registered before they had time to decide whether to look. She was looking at a painting of a sunset. It was not his best work. He had done it quickly the previous afternoon. From a specific quality of light he had seen over a rooftop and had wanted to capture before it left. It was a working painting, honest, not polished. The kind that showed the process of making rather than the finished idea of the thing. She looked at it for perhaps 30 seconds. "That sunset," she said. "You captured the sadness in the colors." He looked at her. She had said the specific thing that he had thought when he was making it. Not what it looked like, what it was doing. The sadness in the colors, which was what he had been trying to capture, and which was the reason the painting was not polished, because polish would have removed the sadness. "Thank you," he said. "Most people just see a mess." She looked at him then, actually looked, the full attention of someone who was not evaluating but simply seeing. "I'm Maya," she said. "I don't have a lot of money, but I have an extra sandwich. You look like you haven't eaten since Tuesday." He had eaten since Tuesday. He had eaten that morning, in fact. But he had not eaten well, and the sandwich she produced from her bag was the kind of sandwich that someone makes when they care about what is in the sandwich. There was actual thought in it, the thought of someone who understood that food was a communication as much as a nutrition. "Thank you," he said. She sat down. Not offered a seat, just sat down, on the concrete ledge of the planter beside his stall, with the ease of someone who did not calculate sitting down decisions. They talked. It was one of the better conversations Arthur Sterling had had in several years, not because it was about significant things, it was about ordinary things. The city, the light, why she had stopped, what she did, which was nursing, which she described the way people describe things they have chosen genuinely rather than things they have ended up doing. "Why do you paint?" she said. He thought about how to answer this as art rather than as Arthur. "I think," he said slowly, "that if you look at something long enough and carefully enough, you find the truth in it. And that is a strange thing to want, because the truth is not always comfortable. But it is the only thing that stays." She looked at him. "I like that," she said. "I'm a nurse. I see the truth every day. It's usually messy, but it's real." He ate half the sandwich. She ate the other half. They sat on the concrete ledge, with the city traffic going past, and the cold getting warmer as the Harmattan morning moved toward afternoon. She stood to leave. He thought, "This is the first person I have wanted to talk to in 7 weeks." "Same time next Thursday," he said. He had not planned to say it. She looked at him. "I walk this way on Thursdays," she said. "I might have another sandwich." She walked away. He watched her go. He picked up his notebook. He did not write anything for a long moment. Then he wrote. She looked at the painting before she looked at me. "Stay with us, because the next few months will change everything." The Thursday sandwich became a habit before either of them acknowledged it as one. The second Thursday she had brought 2 sandwiches and a flask of tea, which was a decision that required planning. You do not bring a flask of tea to a street corner on a cold morning unless you intended to. He noted this without commenting on it. The third Thursday, he had a painting waiting for her. Not a formal gift. He had left it leaning against the planter ledge at the spot where she sat, a small canvas, the size of a paperback book, showing the concrete ledge and the planter from the angle of someone sitting on it looking outward at the street. It was the most honest painting he had made in weeks because it was about the conversation rather than the scene. She picked it up. She looked at it for a long time. "This is us," she said. "From the outside," he said. "From the inside," she said. She looked at the angle of it. "You are not standing outside looking at this. You are inside it looking out." He had not articulated this to himself. She had read the painting correctly in less than 30 seconds. "Take it," he said. She looked at him. "I cannot pay." "It is not for sale," he said. "It is for you." She took it. She wrapped it carefully in the paper she had the sandwiches in and put it in her bag. "Thank you, Art," she said. Her name for him was Art. He had told her his name on the second Thursday, and she had taken it and used it the way people use names when they have decided to trust them, naturally, comfortably, as if it had always been the name. They began meeting on days that were not Thursdays. Not arranged meetings, the kind that happen because 2 people are moving through the same part of the city for their own reasons, and the coincidence stops being a coincidence once it happens enough times. She worked at Lagos General Hospital, a government hospital in a part of the city that was not far from where he painted. Her shifts were long and her days off irregular, but she walked past his corner on the way to the market, on the way to certain errands, sometimes simply because the route had become the route. He walked past her corner on the way to things that he adjusted to be on her side of the city. He did not examine this adjustment too closely. They shared coffee from the kiosk 2 streets over where the proprietor, a short, rapidly cheerful man named Jide, made coffee that was too sweet and too strong and absolutely the right thing for a cold morning. They talked at the kiosk, and they talked on the street, and they talked on the bench in the park nearby on the days when the park was not too crowded. She told him about her work, not the general description she had given the first day, the specific stories. The patient in the ward who had been there for 6 weeks and whose family visited every day without exception, who had told Maya that the visits were the medication that the medicines couldn't reach. The night shift that went wrong, the way wrong shifts went wrong, slowly and then suddenly, and then with the specific aftermath of a night that required you to sit in the break room for 20 minutes before you could get into the car. She told him about her family, her mother in Enugu, a retired teacher who called every Sunday morning at 7:30 without fail, and whose calls Maya picked up regardless of whether she had slept or not, because missing her mother's call was not something she was prepared to do. Her brother who was in Germany, an engineer who had moved there 3 years ago, and who existed in her life primarily through voice notes, and the occasional video call that was complicated by time zones, and the specific difficulty of being a person in one place, trying to stay connected to your people in another. She had been in Lagos for 5 years. She had come for the hospital, which had a specialist unit she had wanted to train in. She had stayed because she was good at the work, and the work needed people who were good at it, and leaving felt like leaving something unfinished. He told her about art. Not about Arthur, about art, the person he was presenting as. He had thought about this carefully before the disguise began. The cover story needed to be true enough that it was not a lie so much as a version, something that he was actually living rather than inventing. So Art's story was real. The painting was real. The financial situation was real. He genuinely had no accessible money in the way that Art would not have money. The experience of the work and the street and the cold and the sales was real. The name was not real. The history was not real. He told her Art had grown up in Ibadan. That part was true. He told her Art had a background in technology. True, though not in the way she understood it. He told her Art had stepped away from that to paint, which was true in the specific sense that he had stepped away from everything to be here. She did not ask many questions about his past. This was a quality he noticed and spent time understanding. She was curious about him, genuinely, specifically curious, the curiosity of someone who was paying attention to a person rather than collecting information. But her curiosity expressed itself in the present rather than the past. She was interested in what he thought, what he saw, what he painted, and why. She was not interested in where he had come from in the way that would have required him to construct a detailed history. He was grateful for this. He was also, increasingly, uncomfortable with it, because the discomfort of not lying fully was different from the discomfort of lying, and he was discovering that the in-between space was its own specific kind of difficulty. He had not planned to fall in love. This sounds obvious, of course. He had planned to find someone. He had gone to the street with that purpose. But there is a difference between planning to find someone worth loving and planning to fall in love with a specific person, and the difference is that the second one is not plannable. It happens without your permission. He was falling in love with Maya in the specific, detailed way of someone who had been paying attention to her for long enough to understand the particular shape of her intelligence, the specific quality of her humor, which was dry and quiet, and required you to be paying attention to catch. The way she looked at the paintings, not all paintings, specifically his paintings, with the reading quality that he had only ever seen in people who genuinely understood what visual work was trying to do. He was also falling in love with the specific way she was in the world, the version of her that existed on a cold morning on a concrete ledge, eating half a sandwich with a street painter, which was exactly the same version of her that existed everywhere else. She was not performing anything for him. There was no version of Maya that was adjusted for the context of who she was with. She was just herself, consistently, in a way that he had not encountered often enough in his previous life to take for granted. He thought about this at night in the cold apartment. He thought about the 3 engagements, about the calculation he had always been able to see in people once the warmth was removed, about the specific thing he had been looking for, which was someone who would be the same person regardless of what surrounded them. He thought, she is that person. He thought, and I am lying to her. Not the technical lie, the fundamental one. The lie of being someone other than who he was, which meant that the person she was being herself with was a fiction, which meant that the genuineness of her interaction with him was being given to someone who did not fully exist. He started to spend time thinking about how to tell her. Not yet, he told himself, not yet. He was mid-experiment. He needed to finish it properly. He needed to be certain. But the thinking about telling her was itself a kind of honesty, a kind of movement toward the moment that was inevitable. And then the landlord knocked on the door. This is where the test happens, and Art does not expect Maya's response. Bell subscribed to Tribal Taily's hub because what Maya says next is the part that Arthur did not see coming. Hit that bell. Arthur had arranged the eviction test before he had met Maya. In his original plan, the plan from before Thursday sandwiches and coffee at Jide's kiosk, and the painting that she wrapped in sandwich paper, the eviction test was the final evaluation. A staged crisis, a moment of apparent bottom, to see what a person who cared about him would do when everything was gone. He had arranged it with his security manager, Emeka, the only person from his real life who knew where he was, and who maintained at a safe distance a monitoring arrangement that Arthur had described as non-negotiable. Emeka played the landlord. He came on a Tuesday evening when he knew Maya would be there. She had taken to stopping by the apartment occasionally, which was not something Arthur had arranged, but that had happened naturally as the months passed and the comfort between them increased. She had been there that evening, sitting in the one good chair in the apartment while Arthur made tea on the single burner when the knock came. Emeka was good. He had the voice and the energy of someone who meant what they were saying. You're 4 months behind. Pack your things, Art. I want you out by Friday. Arthur performed. He sat on the floor. He put his head in his hands. He went through the script he had prepared, the paintings not selling, the money gone, nowhere to go. He said, Maya, you should leave me. You deserve someone with a real job. He said it, and he felt the specific wrong of it the moment it left his mouth. Not the wrongness of the acting, the wrongness of the position. He was asking her to respond to a crisis that was not real, to show him what she would do in a situation that he had manufactured, while she was genuinely in the situation of someone who was sitting in a cold apartment with a man she was falling in love with, taking him at face value, not knowing that the apartment and the crisis and the man himself were not what they appeared. She knelt on the floor beside him. She took his paint-stained hands. She said, Stop, look at me. He looked at her. I didn't fall in love with your paintings, Art. I fell in love with you. He thought, she is passing the test. He thought, she is passing a test she does not know she is taking. He thought, what kind of person gives a test they do not tell you about? She said, I have some savings. We can find a smaller room. I believe in you. He looked at her face. He had been looking at faces for months with the specific attention of someone who had decided to understand what faces were doing underneath what they were saying. He had been reading Maya's face for months. Her face on the floor of the cold apartment was the face of someone who was afraid not for herself, but for him, and who was choosing anyway. The choosing was visible in the set of her jaw and the particular quality of the eye contact she was maintaining, which was the eye contact of someone who was deciding to be fully present in a difficult moment rather than managing their way through it. He thought she is real. He thought, and I am not. He said, Maya. No, she said, we are not doing the you should leave me speech. We are figuring this out. And the specific, complete wrongness of the situation arrived in him like cold water. He was not doing the experiment anymore. He had been doing the experiment, and the experiment had worked, and he had found what he was looking for, and he had continued anyway because he was scared of what came next, which was telling her the truth. He thought, I have to tell her. But he did not tell her that night. He told himself he needed to prepare. He needed to find the right moment. He needed to think about how to say it in a way that she could receive and understand and not feel was a betrayal. He told himself these things, and he knew, sitting on the floor of the apartment while Maya made the tea that he had not finished making, that they were the things you told yourself when you were afraid. 3 weeks passed. He kept not telling her. And in those 3 weeks, something shifted. He could feel it shift without being able to prevent it. The relationship was deepening. They were spending more time together. The conversations were going deeper. She was showing him more of herself. He was showing her more of himself as far as art could show anything. And with every increment of depth, the gap between what she was giving and what he was not telling her became wider. She had also, in those 3 weeks, mentioned the hospital. Specifically, the hospital's management. The specific frustrations of working in a government facility whose administrative structure was, she had said it diplomatically, in the way of someone who loved her work and did not want to perform bitterness about its institutional context. Not ideal. She had mentioned the ownership. There had been changes in the hospital board. She did not know the details. She was not in administration. But there were changes, and the word going around the ward was that the ownership structure was being reorganized, and nobody entirely knew what that meant for the staff. He had said nothing. He knew what it meant. He had the documents in his email. He had been in the meeting where the decision was made about the hospital's restructuring. The hospital was one of 14 healthcare facilities that Sterling Group had acquired through its healthcare management division over the past 4 years. He knew every detail of the management plan. He knew the staffing implications. He knew the budget allocations. He said nothing. He told himself he would tell her everything soon. And then the black car arrived. It was not planned. It was not Arthur's decision. It was Emeka's decision, made after a specific phone call with Arthur's lawyer in which the lawyer had described a situation in the business that required Arthur's physical presence within 48 hours. Not a crisis, but a significant decision that could not be managed remotely and that could not be delegated. Emeka had tried 3 times to reach Arthur through the private device and had not been able to get a response because Arthur had left the device in the apartment that morning and was with Maya at the park. Emeka made a judgment call. He brought the car. Arthur was standing outside the apartment building when it arrived. Maya was beside him. They had just come back from the park. She was still holding the coffee cup from Jaid's kiosk. They were talking about something small. He cannot now remember what it was, some ordinary thing, the texture of a normal afternoon. The car appeared. Maya looked at it. Art, is everything okay? He looked at the car. He thought, this is not how this was supposed to happen. He looked at Maya. He thought, she's going to find out right now whether I tell her or the car does. He told her. Not gracefully, not with the prepared speech he had been building for 3 weeks. He told her the way you tell someone something you have been not telling them when the moment of not telling runs out, directly, without adequate preamble, with the specific inadequacy of truth arriving too fast. My name is not Art, he said. It is Arthur, Arthur Sterling. She looked at him. She looked at the car. She looked at him again. The Sterling Group, she said. Her voice was very even. The even quality of someone who is keeping everything steady because they do not yet know what they are feeling. Yes, he said. She was quiet for a long moment. The hospital where I work, she said. He understood the question. Yes, he said. She looked at him. You have been watching me, she said. For months, you have been watching how I respond to things, the eviction that was arranged. Yes, he said. You tested me, she said. You manufactured a crisis to see what I would do. She was not raising her voice. This was the specific quality of her anger when it was real. It was very quiet and very clear. I need to think, she said. Maya. No, she said. I need to think, and I cannot think standing next to you right now. She gave him back the coffee cup. She walked away. He stood on the pavement outside the apartment building that he owned and watched the woman he loved walk away from him, and understood something with complete clarity for the first time. The test had not been about her. The test had been about him. He had designed it as a way to determine her character. What it had actually determined was his own, specifically, his cowardice. His willingness to place the burden of proving herself on someone who had done nothing to deserve suspicion, while he himself was conducting an ongoing, sustained deception. He had been afraid to trust, and his solution to being afraid to trust was to run an operation instead of having a conversation. He had taken someone who was honest with him and had not been honest with her. He understood now exactly what that was. He got in the car. He told Emeka, "Give me 1 hour." He spent the hour not on the business matter. He spent it writing. He found a piece of paper and he wrote what he should have said on the pavement, not a letter, just an attempt to put the truth into words that were more adequate than what he had produced. He wrote, "I was afraid, not of you, of what I had learned to expect. I built a cage made of past hurts and I put it around both of us and told myself I was protecting something. I was protecting myself. You were never the risk. I was." He did the business matter. He went back to the apartment. He sat and waited. She came back, but not in the way he expected. Maya came back on Thursday. Not Tuesday, not Wednesday. Thursday, the day of the sandwiches and the coffee and the concrete ledge. She came at the same time she had always come, which was mid-morning when her shift ended and before she went home to sleep. She did not come to the apartment. She came to the corner. His painting things were there. He had gone back to the corner on Wednesday because he did not know what else to do with himself, and because the painting was the thing he could do that required all of his attention, and that allowed him to be somewhere other than in the apartment waiting. She stood at the corner for a moment. He saw her from 20 meters away. He put down the brush. She came to the stool. She looked at the current canvas. He had been painting the park, specifically the bench they had sat on most often, specifically the quality of the light on it on a Tuesday morning. "That's ours," she said. "Yes," he said. She sat on the concrete ledge. She did not have a sandwich. He understood this. "I have been thinking," she said. "Yes," he said. "I have been thinking about what you did," she said. "What the actual thing was. Not what it means about you, I will get to that, but the actual thing." He waited. "You were in pain," she said. "You had been hurt in a specific way 3 times. Not small hurt, the kind of hurt that makes you believe that something that should be simple is impossible. And you decided that the only way to access what you needed was to become someone else." "Yes," he said. "That is very sad," she said. He looked at her. "Not an insult," she said. "I mean it exactly. It is sad. The idea that a person with everything you have could believe that the only way someone would love him honestly was if they didn't know who he was." He was quiet. "And then I thought," she said, "about the man I fell in love with, And I was trying to be angry at you by telling myself that man was not real. But I kept running into the problem that he was real. Art was real. The things you thought and said and how you saw the paintings and the way you talked about what it meant to look for the truth in things, that was real. That was you. Yes, he said. So I am not in love with a fiction, she said. I am in love with you, and you happen to also own several hospitals and half the city. He looked at her. That is not how I would have described the situation, he said. I know, she said. I am describing it from my side. She looked at the canvas. The test was wrong, she said. Yes, he said. I need you to understand why, she said. Not just that it was wrong. Why? Tell me, he said. Because I was not a variable, she said. I was not a question waiting to be answered. I was a person who was choosing you every day. With the information I had, I was choosing you. And the test said, I don't trust your choices. I need to control the conditions to be sure. And that is not a thing you do to someone you love. That is a thing you do when you love your own safety more than you love the person. He held this. You are right, he said. I know, she said. I was a coward, he said. Yes, she said. But you are sitting here in your old paint-stained shirt, not in a suit, waiting on a street corner. So, you are a coward who has some specific qualities that I find difficult to dismiss. He looked at her. She looked at him. If you had told me at the beginning, she said. If you had said, I am Arthur Sterling and I am trying to live as a normal person for 6 months because I have been hurt and I am trying to understand what real feels like, I would have thought you were insane. Yes, he said. But I would have respected the honesty, she said, even the insane version of it. He looked at his hands. What do we do now? He said. She was quiet for a moment. Now, she said, you tell me the truth about everything. Not the past, I don't need a business history. The truth about what you want, what you are afraid of, what the 3 engagements were and what they did to you. I want to know the person, not the resume. That will take more than a morning, he said. I have time, she said. You should be sleeping, he said. You just finished a shift. Art, she said. He stopped. She looked at him. I said I have time, she said. He bought 2 coffees from Jide. He came back. He sat on the stool. She sat on the concrete ledge. He talked. He told her about a manual, about the chair in the sitting room, about the 3 engagements and the specific way each one had arrived at the same conclusion by a different route, about what it was like to be invisible for the first time in years, and what that had taught him about how much of his life had been conducted through the medium of his name, and what that meant about whether people actually knew him. He told her about the plan, the full plan from the beginning. Why the corner, why the paintings, why 6 months. He told her that the plan had broken somewhere around the 3rd Thursday. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet. She said, the painting you gave me, the small one, the view from the concrete ledge. Yes, he said. That was real, she said. Yes, he said. Not the experiment, not the test. That specific painting was you trying to say something true. He looked at her. Yes, he said. She picked up her coffee. Okay, she said. Okay, what? He said. Okay, Arthur Sterling, she said. We figure it out. He looked at her. He said, you understand that my life it is not simple. The company, the visibility, the things that come with it. I work 12-hour shifts in a government hospital, she said. My life is also not simple. It is different, he said. Everything is different from everything else, she said. That is not a reason. He looked at her. He thought, she's going to tell me the same thing regardless of whether I have money or not. He thought, that is what I was looking for. He thought I found it. 6 months later, Arthur Sterling returned to the Sterling Group offices. not with a dramatic announcement, with the specific quiet of someone who had been somewhere else and had come back changed in ways that were internal and therefore invisible from the outside, but that expressed themselves in the decisions he made from the first week back. The first decision was about the hospital. The restructuring plan that had been on the table before he left had a specific element that the management team had flagged as potentially complex: a staffing rationalization in two of the smaller facilities that would reduce certain positions. It was financially sound. It was also, Arthur now understood from having heard Maya describe the texture of a 12-hour shift in a ward that was already understaffed, a decision that would be felt by specific people in specific ways that the spreadsheet did not capture. He changed the approach. Not reversed it, changed it. He brought in a different methodology. He spent a day in the hospital himself, not announced, not as Arthur Sterling, just as someone doing a management assessment, and he walked the wards and he spoke to the nurses on the floor, and he understood what the restructuring would actually produce in human terms, and he made different decisions. His management team noticed the different quality of the decision-making after he came back. They did not know where it came from. He did not explain it. Maya knew. She came to the Sterling Group building 6 weeks after the conversation at the corner. Not for any formal reason. Arthur had asked if she wanted to see it, and she had said yes, and they had gone on a Sunday when the building was quiet, and he could show her without the specific performance of the executive environment. She walked through it the way she walked through things, without pretense, with full attention. At the end, in his office on the top floor, she stood at the window and looked at Lagos below. "You built this," she said. "Yes," he said. "The same person who sits on a cold stool and paints sunsets for 2,000 naira," she said. "Yes," he said. She turned. "Don't lose that person," she said. "I won't," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I mean it," she said, "because the person in this office is real, but the person on the stool is also real, and you need both of them." "I know," he said. He did know. The 6 months had taught him this specifically, that the version of himself that existed without the name and the building was not a lesser version, and the version that existed with the name and the building was not the one who understood what mattered. Both were necessary. Both were him. His mother met Maya in December. Grace had known, in the way of mothers, that something had happened during the 6 months that Arthur did not fully explain. She had accepted the private health retreat story because she was not someone who pushed before she was invited in. But she watched her son in December and she saw something different. She could not name it immediately. Then she met Maya. They sat in Grace's kitchen in Ibadan. Arthur had driven down for a weekend, his first time home in 8 months, with Maya in the passenger seat. Grace made jollof rice and they ate at the kitchen table, and Grace and Maya talked about nursing and about Enugu and about Maya's mother who called every Sunday at 7:30 without fail. When Arthur went to get something from the car, Grace looked at Maya. She said, "You see him?" Maya looked at her. "I see him," she said. Grace was quiet for a moment. "He lost his father," she said, "a few years ago. He does not talk about it the way men talk about things. He carries it the way men carry things." "I know," Maya said. "He told you about a manual," Grace said. "He told me about the chair," Maya said, "the sitting room chair." Grace was very still. Then she said, "He hasn't told anyone about the chair." "I know," Maya said. Grace looked at her. She nodded. Once, the way people nod when something has settled into its correct place. Arthur came back with the thing from the car. Grace said, "Are you hungry?" Arthur said, "Always." She served him more rice. The evening went on in the way of evenings that are exactly right, not perfectly right, not without small awkwardnesses and the specific navigation of three people who were still learning each other's rhythms. But right. They got engaged a year and a half after the corner conversation. Not with a dramatic proposal. Arthur had the ring. He had it for 3 months before he used it, because he was learning the patience that the 6 months on the street had begun to teach him, and he wanted to use the ring at the right moment rather than at a planned moment. The right moment arrived on a Thursday morning. They were at the corner. He still kept the stool there sometimes, not every week, but when the light was right. He was painting. She was sitting on the concrete ledge with her coffee. He was painting the ledge. Again, the same view, the same angle, the third version of this particular painting. She said, "You keep painting this." "I know," he said. "Why?" she said. He put down the brush. He turned to look at her. "Because it is where it started," he said. He reached into his jacket pocket. He put the ring on the ledge between them. She looked at it. She looked at him. "Art," she said. "Arthur," he said, "but also art, both." She picked up the ring. She held it. She looked at him with the full, clear attention that he had fallen in love with on the first Thursday. "Yes," she said. The wedding was in January. Not in January. Grace insisted on a church wedding, and a church wedding in January in Ibadan required specific considerations. The wedding was in March, in Ibadan, in the church where Grace had married Emmanuel 38 years before. It was not a small wedding. Arthur's professional life made small weddings logistically complicated, but it was not a large production either. It was a wedding where the people in the room were people who actually knew the two people getting married, which is a specific kind of wedding that is rarer than it should be. Clara attended. She had been invited through a professional channel. Her family had a connection to one of the Sterling Group board members, and the invitation was the kind that was difficult to avoid without making a statement. She came. She was gracious in the public sense. She did not recognize the artist from the market corner, which was its own small data point. Maya wore a dress that Grace had helped choose. Arthur wore a suit. Agiora, his sister, cried through the ceremony and told Arthur afterward that he had done something right for the first time in his romantic life, which was her version of the warmest compliment she was prepared to give. Tund, his university roommate, gave a speech that was mostly about all the ways Arthur had been difficult to know for the past 20 years, and that ended with a line that was the most accurate thing anyone said about the whole story. He said, "Arthur has always been good at finding the truth in things. He just had to live on a street corner for 6 months to find out that the truth he was looking for was not in other people. It was in himself. Maya just had to wait for him to get there." Maya laughed. Arthur looked at her laughing. He thought, "This is what I was looking for." He thought, not the loyalty test, not the experiment, not the 6 months. This specific woman laughing at a speech in a church in Ibadan, in a dress that Grace helped choose, who calls her mother in Enugu every Sunday at 7:30, and who walks through things with full attention, and who once handed half a sandwich to a stranger on a street corner, and sat down on the concrete ledge like it was the most natural thing in the world. Arthur kept the stool. He did not keep it in the office or display it as a monument. He kept it in the studio, the room in their house where he painted, which was a proper room now with good light and proper materials, but where the stool from the corner sat against the wall because it was the truth of where the work had come from. He painted on weekends. Not all weekends. He ran a significant business, and significant businesses required the attention of their leaders, and weekends were not fully free in the way that weekends are when your professional obligations are smaller. But enough weekends. Enough Saturday mornings with paint on his hands and Maya's voice from the other room, or the specific Saturday morning quiet of the house that was its own kind of company. He was a different CEO after the 6 months. His team noticed it without knowing the source. He was less distant in the specific way that successful executives became distant, the distance of someone whose position had elevated them above the daily human texture of the organization. He asked different questions. He had a quality of attention in conversations with people at every level of the company that had not been there before. He had learned it on a street corner. Not learning as a skill, learning as a shift in what he noticed. He had spent 6 months noticing everything because he had nothing else to look at and no status to fall back on and no name that organized the room for him. He had learned to see the texture of things, and that quality of seeing, once developed, does not leave when the circumstances that produced it do. Maya continued nursing. This was a decision they had discussed clearly and simply. She could have stopped. Arthur had offered nothing. He had simply made it clear that whatever she wanted to do with her work was something she would decide and he would support. She had decided to continue, which was the decision he would have expected and which she had made for reasons that had nothing to do with him. The work was hers. The patients were hers. The 12-hour shifts were hers. These were not burdens. They were the thing she had chosen and the thing she was good at. She had also, quietly, begun something else. She had been thinking about a specific gap, a thing she saw in the hospital and the ward that was about the families. The patients had medical care. Their families, who were often from other cities and who were sitting in the hospital waiting rooms for days or weeks, and who needed specific kinds of support, practical, emotional, logistical, had nothing organized for them. She had been thinking about what a program for hospital families would look like for about a year. She told Arthur about it one evening. He said, "Tell me more." She told him more. He said, "What would it take to start it?" She told him. He said, "Do it." She said, "I don't need." "I know you don't need," he said. "I am offering because I believe in the idea and because you have spent years doing work that needed doing and I have resources that could make this happen faster. If you want them. If not, you don't have to take them." She looked at him. She said, "Half. I want to fund half of it myself." He looked at her. "Why half?" he said. "Because this one is mine," she said, "and I want it to be mine from the beginning." He nodded. He understood. The program launched 18 months later. It was small initially, a pilot in 2 hospital facilities, both Sterling Group facilities because that was where the infrastructure existed. It addressed exactly the gap Maya had identified. Within a year, it had been adopted by 2 additional hospitals outside the Sterling Group network. Grace told Maya when she heard, "You are your mother's daughter." Maya told Arthur what Grace had said. Arthur thought about Emmanuel in the sitting room chair. He thought about the question he had asked his father in 2010, "I have an idea." He thought about the 3 questions Emmanuel had asked, the timeline, the commitment, the whether it works. He thought he asked the 3 questions because he wanted to know if it was real. He thought not the business, me. He wanted to know if I was real. He told Maya this. She listened. "He sounds like someone worth knowing," she said. "He was," Arthur said. "He would have asked you 3 questions." "What would they have been?" she said. Arthur thought. "Are you real?" he said. "Are you consistent, and do you understand what this is for?" She looked at him. "Those are your 3 questions," she said. "Yes," he said. "I think I got them from him." She was quiet for a moment. "For the record," she said, "the answers are yes, yes, and yes." He smiled. She smiled back. The story has an ordinary ending because that is what the right endings look like. Not the gold-sealed envelopes or the black cars or the revelation scenes. The ordinary ending of 2 people who found each other through a process that was partly planned and partly luck, and partly the specific quality of being the person you actually are in a moment that mattered. Arthur had wanted to find a loyal wife. He had found something more specific than that. He had found a person who looked at his paintings the way he made them, not at what they appeared to be, but at what they were doing. Who had sat on a concrete ledge in the cold and handed him half a sandwich and asked him why he painted, and had taken his answer seriously and given him her honest one back. Who, when she found out he had been someone else, had spent 2 days thinking about it and then came back to the corner. Not because she forgave him everything in a rush of romantic feeling. Because she had thought about it clearly and honestly, and had arrived at the understanding that the person she was in love with was real even if the name was not, and that the question of whether to continue was not about whether he had been perfect, but about whether what they had was worth the difficulty of working through it. That is the kind of love that is worth finding. It does not require a test. It requires 2 people who choose each other with full information, when full information finally arrives. If you take anything from this story, take that. The test is not the way. The truth is the way. It is slower and more exposed and much more vulnerable. But it is the only one that produces something real. This has been Tribal Tales Hub. If this story did something for you, if Arthur's question or Maya's answer or the concrete ledge stayed with you like this video, it is the most direct way to tell us that stories like this one are what you want. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub. Every week, a new story. Not a template, not a format, a real story told as well as we can tell it. Hit that bell so you are there when the next one arrives. Comment below. Tell us, would you have come back to the corner like Maya did? Or would the deception have been too much? Tell us honestly. We want to know. Share this story. Send it to someone who is looking for love in a way that is making them less themselves. Send it to someone who needs to hear that the test is not the answer. Send it to someone who deserves a concrete ledge conversation. This has been Tribal Tales Hub. We will see you in the next story.